Hello and welcome to Transformations Cafe, where we're serving light as bold as love. I'm your host, Ken Marks. Transformations Cafe is brought to you by the Institute for Global Transformation. We're a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization. Our vision is a world working together to utilize the power, love, and wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. And our mission is to support transformations in consciousness and in the way humanity interacts with one another so as to bring about positive change in the world individually and collectively. We invite you to please visit us on our website, which is theglobaltransformation.org. If you would like to become part of our community, there's a join button on the top of every page on the website. And if you'd like to support our work, including programs like this one, there's also a donate button on every page, and that will take you straight through to PayPal. This program is being recorded and will be published on IFGT's YouTube channel. So we invite you to please subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon when you do so, and that will notify you when we post new content there, including when this program will be available. Transformations Cafe is recorded in front of a live audience. And so for those of you joining us today, thank you. And we invite our live audience to participate in the conversation. It's more than just an interview. I would like to introduce our guest tonight, who is Dr. Mona Sobhani. And I'm going to read a brief bio, and then we'll get into the conversation. Dr. Sobhani is a cognitive neuroscientist, author, and entrepreneur, a former research scientist at the University of Southern California. She holds a doctorate in neuroscience from the University of Southern California and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Vanderbilt University with the MacArthur Foundation Law and Neuroscience Project. She was also a scholar with the Sachs Institute for Mental Health Law, Policy, and Ethics, and her work has been featured in the New York Times, Vox, and other media outlets. She's the author of a book titled Proof of Spiritual Phenomena, a neuroscientist discovery of the ineffable mysteries of the universe, which we'll be discussing more tonight, of course. And the book details her transformation from a diehard scientific materialist to an open-minded spiritual seeker, providing a deep dive into the literature of psychology, quantum physics, neuroscience, philosophy, and esoteric texts. Dr. Sobhani also explores the relationship between psi phenomena, the transcendence of space and time, and spirituality. She is co-founder of Exploring Consciousness, a community of curious scientists who are seeking to understand consciousness, spirituality, and the nature of our reality. In the brave new world of psychedelic science Substack, she writes about the psychedelic renaissance, altered states of consciousness, and the transpersonal. So Mona has done several interviews now, and those are on YouTube. And along with her book, those who would like more detail on her scientific career and the experiences she had that led to her spiritual awakening and transformation, I highly recommend and invite you to please check those out. For this program, we want to dive deeper into some other topics that I think are very important and will also be very interesting, certainly related to the work that she's done. But if you want the background and how she made that transformation from scientist to someone open to many more things, there's lots of other interviews to check out, and I can't recommend her book highly enough. Last thing I want to do is to thank and congratulate you on the incredible work that you've already done. I've said this to Mona already. We've had a chance to talk a little bit, an email exchange quite a bit, but I want to make this public. Not only is the research that you reviewed and conducted regarding spiritual and related phenomena incredibly broad in its scope. I mean, it really was massive, the work that you did. But your hard work is only dominated by your bravery in facing both the academic research environment directly and your courage to get and stay on your spiritual path, which required enduring incredibly difficult transformational experiences. My interest in wanting to meet you include the fact that much of my own path is similar to yours. And so I personally understand how difficult and rewarding your path has been. And it was just such a special treat and experience to read your book and to have the chance to meet you. It's just, I've been glowing since you
Well,
said yes
thank
to
you.
our invitation. So without any further ado, Mona Sobhani, welcome to Transformations Cafe.
Oh, thank you so much for all the kind words. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great, thanks. So that we don't just go cold into some other things, if you want to just give kind of a brief description of the events that kind of led you from old me to new me, as you put in your book, that'd be great, just to kind of make sure the audience has got at least an outline of what happened.
Yeah. It is quite a long story, but the short version is that I was a very strict materialist scientist, and didn't believe in anything spiritual or religious at all. And then I kind of had an existential crisis, which I think opened me a little bit to searching or questioning, at least, is there a reason we're here? Is there meaning in the universe? And then through my Persian cultural heritage, I encountered divination, which is one type of psi or psychic phenomena, through my mother. So somebody who was trustworthy and not trying to dupe me or do a cold reading. And so over many, many years, I encountered her readings and just lived in cognitive dissonance because I couldn't explain them with science, but I knew that they worked. So it wasn't until the crisis and a few events that she predicted that were more emotional and kind of big life events that I started to get really curious and had to confront it, I think, and couldn't live in dissonance anymore. And so that's where I launched a project, just a personal project, really, to understand, kind of find answers to the universe. And I was like, well, science is not providing them for me. Like, I have a PhD, I've been in this field. I don't go to science for comfort, and I couldn't find any answers. So I went looking elsewhere.
When you said your mother's readings, that
Oh,
those are with Mediterranean or Middle Eastern coffee.
yes, yeah, because she uses coffee grounds. So it's a thicker kind of coffee that when you drink it, the grounds stay in the cup. You flip it. It's kind of like tea leaf reading, I assume.
Right.
But they form images, the grounds. And then if you have somebody who is an intuitive reader, they can look at the pictures and intuit things about your past, present, and future. So that's how she does it.
But I can't emphasize enough how, if there was more of a contrast, I can't imagine it, between someone coming from your perspective as this, hardcore scientific materialist. And I imagine if it was anybody but someone you cared a lot about, like your mom, and they were saying, oh, I can tell something about what your life's going to be like by looking at your coffee grounds, you probably wouldn't have even stayed in the room. But
Yeah.
then, using your training, you actually started to treat her predictions like data points, right? And saw
Mhm.
trends. And so it was
Yes.
already, it started kind of a neat blend of your training, your perspectives on how you would approach life. And then, wait a
Yeah.
minute, the data doesn't lie. Here it is. So it's kind of seemed like a kind
Yeah.
of,
And I think also because it had a physical component helped. I think if somebody was super intuitive, but just saying things, I think maybe it would have been harder, but my mom would always point out the pictures, and sometimes you could see them yourself. So it added that kind of physical component where, oh yeah, I do see what she means. She would explain what it means, and then we would see how it would unfold. But yeah, just following it over the years, it was really creepy how accurate it was.
and it's kind of neat because the questions you started asking because of that were, how could this happen? Does this mean like the universe isn't just random, which is one of the kind of tenets of material science, right? Is nothing is organized. There's no reason to it. It just, things just happen. The billiard ball is colliding, right? And yet here
Yeah.
here was something that didn't seem to make sense. And you do just an awesome job later in the book of kind of talking about the potential of some kind of energetic field or field that, you know, might hold all the information. But if you were to think about the old test questions that say compare and contrast, if you could do that, what would be some of the most significant changes that you would describe from what you refer to again in the book as your old me self versus the new me, with the old me being your science self, the new me
Oh,
being who you are now. So what do you think some of the most significant differences in those two
like
moments?
personal characteristics, you mean?
Yeah, or just
Person.
maybe perspective on life too. And
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think that I was a lot more, and I say it in the book, I mean, I was a lot more close-minded. I felt like, especially when it came to reality or science, or as I say in the book, science was my religion. So I think that I really truly thought, kind of as they teach, that science in the beginning anyway, in graduate school, that science could measure everything, or that if we can't measure it if we can't measure it with science, then it's not worth knowing. And I think that I didn't realize that, you know, that's within a worldview, a scientific materialist worldview, and that if you step outside of that, then, you know, those things don't apply, and that there's a whole other way of being in the world, like a more creative, flowing, qualitative, subjective way of being. So also in neuroscience, like we make the distinction between left brain and right brain, and we have all these studies that show that they're really different. And left brain, now I kind of think of it as like my old science self was really more rationalist left brain, which the left brain does tend to be more narrow and detail focused and not open to new ideas. It takes like the facts that it has and fits the world into the facts. And then the right brain is more creative and spiritual and flowy and contextual, and it pulls everything into context. And so it's more like the explorer. It's like, what else is out there that I can pull in to make sense of the facts I have. So they're like, and they work, you know, together. And so I think of it in that way. Like now I'm much more, I mean, I don't know if I'm actually much more right-brained, or I don't know if there's an actual difference in the way you operate, but I mean, my thinking has definitely changed. It definitely used to be much more reductionistic. Like I used to see things in parts, because that's what you do as a scientist. They train you to think in a certain way of, how can I reduce this into parts? How can I put this into a statistical model? What would affect it? You know, so not that I've lost that, I can still do it, but I don't use it as 24 hours a day like I used to. And I can look at things with a bigger picture and more of like a qualitative, artistic, holistic way that I couldn't do before. And I'm definitely more open-minded now. I used to think not that I knew everything. I think by the end of graduate school, you do realize science has a lot of limits. We make a lot of assumptions. You know, in private, I think most scientists would admit to you, you know, if you change a few variables and parameters of our studies here and there, you know, would it replicate, especially in psychology or neuroscience? That's the case. So I think that I was by the end of grad school anyway, I was a little less confident in it, but that was still my worldview. But now I'm definitely much more, I mean, I can see there's a lot of things we cannot measure with science. A lot of aspects of being human that we just cannot, we try, but they're not very effective ways of measuring what makes us human. So yeah, I mean, the way I think has changed in a lot of ways. And I definitely try to be more open-minded and curious. I definitely know that we don't know a lot now.
yeah, which is it really is a remarkable transformation to think that everything can be explained through science and just give it enough time and we'll have it all figured out. And then for some way or ways or another, and you describe several events that happened that really kind of cracked you open in a way, which reminds me of this great Leonard Cohen lyric, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. And you know,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
sometimes we have to kind of be broken open for that happen. You also just reminded me of something else just to mention, because there's a lot of synchronicities that I experienced in reading the book. And when you were talking about the left and right brain differences, I had just heard this person interviewed by Rick Archer on Buddha at the Gas Pump, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who had a stroke that knocked out her entire left brain for a while, and just lived right-brained and was so connected to everything, because that's more of the way the right brain functions.
Another neuroscientist who did like a full review on left brain, right brain, and talks about it really eloquently is Ian McGilchrist. I think his book is Master and the Emissary. So yeah, really excellent book. I recommend it.
Yeah. Dina has put a question in the chat. Hi, Dina. She asked, was your mom always connected spiritually growing up? And if so, at what age did you go on a strictly science path?
I think so. My mom says, she's told me a few experiences from when she was a child that instilled in her an early belief in there being something else. She's not religious. She doesn't, subscribe to any one particular religion, but she's always been very spiritual because she's had direct encounters or direct experiences. So she's always had that. Me, I think when I was 12, I think I wrote this in the book. When I was 12, I sat and thought about religion and decided it didn't make any sense. And so then I dropped, well, we didn't even have a religion. Like, I guess my family would be considered Muslim, but they don't really practice or anything. So I just thought about it and decided it didn't make sense to me and dropped it. And then I'm trying to think. I think I became interested in neuroscience in high school, and then I went into that in college. But the interesting thing is that when I was in college, I was very connected and like in flow with the universe. Like I would always have the craziest coincidences and synchronicities happen. Like even my roommates would notice. So, but I didn't know that it was spiritual. I never really thought about it. It was just the way I lived. So like if I would find a quarter or something, I would just know that I was going to need it later. So I would just pick it up and put it in my bag. And then lo and behold, I would like need it later in the day or something. So I lost that magic after I went to graduate school. I mean, I think I had it maybe for the first 2 years, but then after that, they start hammering it out of you. And especially in neuroscience, they teach you that all meaning is created in the brain. There's no external meaning in the universe. Your brain is a coincidence detector, so it looks for coincidences. It's a storyteller, so it weaves stories to make things meaningful for you. And so, and I mean, to be fair, when you learn a lot of neuroscience and psychology and find out how much human behavior is automatic and driven by your subconscious patterns, there is almost no room for spirituality. Like if I didn't encounter a lot of what I encountered, I could see going on thinking that way because of the studies we do. But now looking back, there's also a lot of what we call variance. There's a lot of unexplained things. And that's why our studies don't always replicate, or we haven't figured out humans, right? You can never fully predict what they're going to do or say. And so, that's interesting. That's where a little bit, I think, of spirituality can come in.
And thanks, Mona. And Chris has his hand up. So if you want to unmute, Chris, and ask your question.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mona, for your presentation. I am a fellow USC alum, so it's so great to listen to a fellow Trojan.
Yes.
I was just wondering, you mentioned what seems to be on the horizontal dimension, the right and left brain hemispheres, the logical sequential left side, the creative affective dimension on the right side. I go into my work, in critical reasoning, critical thinking, into another dimension, another, like the vertical dimension of mind, body, and spirit. And so those two cranial areas relate to the mind. Are you saying that you have discovered, are you going into or fully developing or discovering or filling out your spiritual dimension more as a human being? Is that what's going on? You're not necessarily eschewing science, maybe scientism, but not necessarily science. But you're sort of discovering the spiritual dimension of your human existence. I hope I'm making
Yeah.
sense there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would say that. I definitely didn't see how I was part of scientism, but then it became
Mm.
clear to me how I was during the process. And then I still find the scientific method very useful. But I think that was a helpful distinction that I encountered in the journey, was that the scientific method is helpful, but a scientific materialism is a worldview. It's just one worldview, and that's the worldview we use in science, but it doesn't mean it's ultimate reality. So yeah, for me personally, I just started and and it added a lot of joy to my life. I don't think I even realized how much joy was missing until I started tapping into the spiritual. I mean, first of all, just connecting my mind to my body, which had already been disconnected for so long, but then also pulling in the spirituality. Yeah, it just brought a lot of joy. And I wrote about some of it in the book, but I did all these healing modalities to explore the space, like past life regression and psychedelics and other things. So I started to see how they're all connected.
Yeah, recently I've been discovering a lot more about the Baha'i faith. As you know, it comes from Iran, and I'm not advancing this religion, but was it the leader of that faith had a very he was very comfortable not just with other religions, but with science, because as you know, the Arabs and the Persians, uh, that those civilizations had a lot of scientific advancement. And I know in in Spain, they educated us with science,
Yeah.
poetry, and philosophy, so yeah, it's his writings, was it Baha'i, Ullah Baha'i or something like that, Abdullah Baha'i or something. He does their philosophy really does a good job of making comfort with between science and faith. They're not
Mm.
separate. So anyway, thank you.
No, yes, I love that.
Thanks, Chris. Um, Eric has put a question in the chat, which I'm going to read. So his question is, can you expand on what kind of event or experience presented things to you that convince you that science does not have the answer?
Yeah.
See why I
Yeah.
prefaced that.
Yeah, there were a lot. But one easy thing was the psychic reading. So like after my mom's readings, or after my crisis, I started, like I said, I launched a personal project, and I thought, I'm in LA, and I'm from LA, and I have a lot of friends here. So in my crisis, my friends were in their crises, they had gone to see psychics. So they were like, let's take you to a psychic. And I thought, and I was already curious because of my mom. So I thought, oh, what the hell? Let's just go. We'll just see. And so we went, and since they had gone, they knew good ones. And so I went with them. And yeah, the lady blew my mind, really. She just looked through my soul. It was really embarrassing, actually, because she was just saying things, out loud that I would just only thought to myself, or like deep rooted fears. But then also, but at that time I was super, super skeptical, and I was like, they say that they can read you, and is everything they're saying vague and stuff. But this lady pulled some like random trauma from my childhood that I never think about, and explained like 7 of the variables to me. And so I was just sitting there staring at her like, how did you know that? And that was one of those moments where I was like, this is weird. And statistically, I was like, this is not possible. These, like, the 7 variables were so random. I was like, there's no way she could have guessed this. There's just no way. So that was, I mean, I had a lot of moments like that. And then my girlfriends and I turned it into this thing where we're like, let's go to the same psychic. At the same time, let's go to different ones. Let's swap readings and see if they're generic and vague, but they were specific to each of us. And I think that that's when this obviously is not scientific, but it convinced all of us that there's something there. And that was the start of it. And then since then, I've had so many experiences. I mean, I used to have precognitive dreams a lot when I was young. And then after graduate school, I lost it. Like I said, I kind of lost the connection. But after I started reconnecting, all of that started coming back a lot more. And so when it happens to you yourself, you know, it's harder to discount. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. That was a good question and beautifully answered, Mona. I appreciate that because it really personalizes these things. It's one of the reasons that really enjoy the chance to host this program too, just to make things a bit more real than just something that's read in a book or watched in a video. It's that was beautiful. I appreciate it. Gary asks, Mona, has your new me become more interested in conventional religion, or would you make a distinction between religious interpretations of unusual phenomena and experiences and what you now feel about such things, what you now feel?
Yeah. I'm still not, how do I say this? I'm not personally interested or looking for a religion, but I have a lot more respect for them than I did before, which was 0 respect before. So I have a lot more respect for them now. And I think that they have a lot of universal truths. And I mean, I think they're extremely valuable. Like I just started listening to A Course in Miracles, and you know, like old me would never have even been able to listen to that kind. My body would not let me listen to something like that. The words like God and Jesus to me were like just like kryptonite to Superman. So, but that has changed, you know, and I really after some of my psychedelic experiences and some of my breath work and meditative experiences, I actually think, and maybe this is the neuroscientist in me still, but I actually do think our brains do tell stories and narratives, but that behind those are archetypal forms, right? Kind of like Plato talks about, like there's deep space reality. There's something we can't probably understand. And when it encounters us and our brains turn it into something we can understand. And so that's how I view all of these things now. Like, I don't think that any religion or spiritual or anything is right or wrong. I think that they're all our interpretations, but there is something behind those, some deeper reality, deeper truths.
All right, well, so let's couple of the other areas I wanted to explore. One is something that we, with the Institute for Global Transformation, are exploring more, is actually not trying to send a message in necessarily more everyday terms that really come from more of the esoteric teachings, but to actually lean into that, because I think there's a lot that can be learned. And one of the things that I think was another crack where the light came in was the way that you either coincidentally stumbled into, or perhaps there was something more behind it, the work of Dr. Brian Weiss, who, for those not familiar, is a extremely highly credentialed, Ivy League trained psychiatrist who chaired the Department of Mount Sinai and rather famously entered the popular publication world with a book that produced in the 1980s. Do you know?
I think so.
It goes back a ways, but Many Lives, Many Masters was his first book. And that work you summarize beautifully in your book, and there are many elements of what is referred to and some of our audience at least will recognize either the wisdom or the ancient wisdom, and there are many tellings of that, but there are common aspects to all of that, which is why the wisdom is the wisdom. And so I just wondered if you can talk about some of these and how those also affected your thinking and transformation.
Yeah. So when I was getting when I would get readings from my mom, she wouldn't talk a lot about a spiritual framework. And so I still had the question of meaning and of life. And so when I would get the psychic readings after that, they started mentioning reincarnation and soul essence and stuff like that, but it went over my head because I was not familiar with that at all. So I didn't even register, but I wrote it down and we recorded the sessions, and they planted the seed kind of. And then I heard a podcast episode later that mentioned Brian Weiss's book, and I ordered it. And then when I read the book, it's a psychiatrist case study. So that's what I thought I was reading. It says past life regression on the front of the book, but again, I think it's funny now that I didn't know what that meant. So that also went over my head. It's like classic, there's a name for it in psychology, but anyway. And so when I read his book, it really struck a chord because he was, I think he, like you mentioned, Ivy League educated, went to Columbia and Yale, like well-respected psychiatrist. And he spontaneously stumbled across like one of his patients in a regression telling a past life. And then one day, spontaneously, she starts channeling these masters that start giving messages to him. And the messages were about, that we come and to earth and it's for to learn lessons, and it's nice lessons about charity, love, and hope and optimism and all that stuff. And so I thought, if I hadn't been primed to that idea from the psychics, I don't know how I would have taken that. I feel like I would have just hit a wall. But because they had primed me, I actually got excited and was like, oh my God, they mentioned this in the readings. Maybe now this will make sense to me. So I went back to look at the readings to be like, oh my God, now I have a framework that explains. And so I got excited to understand it and tried to like compare notes and realize that they said the same thing. And so I was like, a psychic and an Ivy League educated psychiatrist. And I was like, okay, I like, what is going on? And so that was the kind of weird situation I found myself in that made me curious to be like, what is happening here? And is it possible, is it possible that this is true? But I remember, I didn't believe it was true for a long time. But I started just wondering, what if it was? And just playing with that idea every day. What if it were true? And that was what changed everything. So yeah.
Yeah, so that was a big shift, right? Because and that is one of the similar experiences that I had too, where you're so used to leaning into what your understanding of the world is, and then all of a sudden the same types of information come at you from multiple sources, which to a science brain, right, that's gathering data, and that's a data pattern, right? It starts to make statistical sense. At least you can start coming at it from that direction. So, but at the same time, it causes kind of a short circuiting, right? Because it's like, how do you, the data is right there, but it's hard to believe. And I think part of what I would hope that people with us during this recording and those who come across this later understand that if you're experiencing something like that, you're not alone. This is a recognized pattern of transformation, and those transformations don't translate as nicely as we'd like them to you take something or you meditate or do something else and suddenly you're experiencing eternal bliss and nirvana. It just doesn't work like that. We have typically go through kind of drop by drop process in this, and it can feel excruciating at times to let go of those things that you used to think were what life was all about. So that's great. And some of these things, like, and we've covered this with some of our other guests, but that life is about lessons intended to help souls grow and evolve toward love and compassion, and reincarnation, and our unique frequencies or notes, and karma, and there maybe being a universal field of consciousness. I think those are some of the things that come out of the wisdom that you got exposed to and then had your mind blown. And we all now reap the benefits of you getting your mind blown. So thanks.
Yeah. And I mean, it was so powerful. I remember the moment when I read it, when I was reading about the masters, and I had to stop reading and put the book down and sit there and be like, I don't know what I'm reading. This is so weird. I can't believe I'm reading this. And I was like,
and I imagine Brian Weiss had the same experience, right? Although he's sitting in his office,
right, exactly.
therapy session, and here's this patient suddenly channeling the ascended masters and
yeah. And it was and I mean, I wrote this in the book, but I was so curious, if I was crazy, and I started talking about the book nonstop to anyone who would listen, which was everyone. And I bought the book for everyone I know, and I was like, read this and tell me what you think, because I just wanted to know if I was nuts or if it was as compelling for them as it was for me. But like I think, and it varied widely. Some people were suddenly on the journey with me, some wouldn't even read it, and some read it and were like, meh. So like it just varied a lot.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to share this comment Dina put in the chat just because it's so funny. She said, I heard it put this way: the truth will set you free, but first it may piss you off. So I think that's kind of it. I'm just going to share an experience that I had quickly, because I think it kind of fits with this, and may help us segue to the next topic I wanted to explore with you, which, as I was reading your book one evening, I just felt this kind of compulsion to just stop and meditate. And I went quickly into a fairly deep meditative state, and then quickly also got kind of a download, and a phrase was communicated to me, and instructions to repeat it several times in my mind and then out loud, and then write it down so I didn't lose it, because that is the way we kind of can bring things from subtle into more dense and have them root in our human minds and brains. So the phrase was transcend disbelief, and then a little later it was also transcend belief. And I think one of the messages that I got kind of overall in reading your book was that if we're going to evolve as a species collectively, that probably is the essence of what has to happen, which is really what happened in your experience and mine as well, and I'm sure many, many other people's, where that disbelief is what causes that confusion. You have to somehow cross through that barrier, right, in order to then evolve to the next version of yourself.
Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, it was really hard for me. It took a very long time. And again, like I mentioned it in the book, but for all of us actually, but definitely for me, I came to realize that our identities are tied up in our beliefs. And so you're not just losing, it sounds easy sometimes, like, oh, just you'll encounter new evidence and you'll update what you believe, but that's not how it works. Like your whole identity oftentimes is, I'm a rationalist, I'm a scientist, I'm an atheist, like you have an identity around these things. So changing that requires a lot of changing yourself. And so it's I think that's why it's so hard. And it really is like I mean, sometimes it does just happen to people, but I do think sometimes it has to be effortful. Like, sometimes I felt like I wanted to stop, or I didn't want to keep transforming because it was too hard.
Yeah.
But then it's too late to go back. So then you're in this middle
Right. You know,
for
I
a
say
while.
that I've said this more times than I can recall. You just can't put those genies back in the bottle.
Yeah,
Once
you
you've crossed
can't.
those thresholds, it's a one-way street, and so, but part of us wants that comfort and the security of what we know, and even in the face of things like your experiences directly going to intuitives and your own mother, providing you with other experiences. And I've had similar things happen where even in the face of that, some parts of us will still try to say that it happened or that it's real or whatever. It's a really fascinating phenomenon when you take the observer role and you just watch it happening. It's even more fascinating. Chris has patiently waited with his hand up for another question.
Yeah, Mona, I wanted to, as I listened to you and other comments, it reminded me of a presentation I watched that involved Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think Tyson, the physicist, astrophysicist, and cosmologist, I think. And they asked him, they said, what was it about the Islamic civilization that precipitated its decline? And he said, what we now know, not perfectly or completely, is that the religious imams in Iran, in other parts of the Middle East, within the Islamic civilization, threatened by science and philosophy and their scientific method, the imams began to say that the work of science and mathematics is the work of the devil.
Hmm.
And so over time, 11th, 12th century, these influential imams who resented science and the power that they lost, in their religion, and I'm making a distinction here between religion and positive spirituality, which is what I believe is a human thing. And so what I'm asking is how how can we sort of stay away from that precipice where, for whatever needs that appeal to us from that impulse, the religious community, how can we just stay away from that precipice that says you must accept that science and all of those things, a lot or most of those things, are the work of the devil? Because we know that when we do that, we go into the dark ages, basically.
Mhm.
So how do we, sort of, discern? Oh, that's a scientific issue. That's a scientific question, and oh, that's a spiritual, religious question, and sort of engage the world with that kind of balance. Can you?
I don't know if I have any practical suggestions, but let me think. I mean, I do see, I was actually going to say that that disbelief is not, and belief, everything in moderation, right? It's important to have both. And it goes back, I think, to what I was saying about the left and the right brain hemispheres. We have both a left and a right, and they work together. So that means both are important for us. So I think that I think it's very hard for humans to remember that, and we do tend to go to one extreme or another for various reasons. But actually, Ian McGilchrist talks about this in his book, of how our world, at least Western culture, has moved into a left hemisphere dominant era. And that's why and I can't get into all the, but he does a beautiful job describing it and explaining it, but we're too rationalist, too focused, too boxed in, and we need to start moving to the right hemisphere, or start moving to more holistic, contextual, interconnected thinking, to balance the two sides. And like, neither side on its own is good. You need both. That's why we have both, right? I think it's in our biology to have both, which means they're both important. So we do, our society needs to like move back to that. As to how to do that, I don't know, but I think he talks about a little in his book, like education. I mean, definitely, like arts keep getting cut from school funding, things like that. So making sure that kids are not only focused on science and math and engineering, but get a healthy dose of art and dance and movement and spirituality or whatever it is, that I think starting there, and never overemphasizing one or the other, we have to find a way to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, because it seems like religious fanaticism ends up in a very dark place, but scientism ends up in a very empty, soulless place,
Sure
you
does.
know? And
That's
the
the
elites,
point Mona makes in her book too.
yeah, the elites try to manipulate us into either or, and it's like, no, both and is possible. So anyway, thank you again.
Yeah, actually, Chris, that's a nice segue, because that's kind of the last major area I wanted to explore with Mona, because I think what uh, one of your larger conclusions through your work so far was, and what many of us have come to realize, is that it isn't an either or. That's a false dichotomy, because everything is everything. It's all connected, and we're evolving toward a place where there's no longer a pitched battle and polarization, but seeing how all of it informs us and helps enrich the experience and our growth overall. I do want to mention that Dina had a quick question, I think, for you, that she says, now, doesn't it seem more rational, this question to you, Mona, doesn't it seem more rational to acknowledge yourself as a spiritual being, and being purely exclusively scientific is irrational? I guess we we're kind of talking about that just now too.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think of I talk about it now, I think, in a way that spirituality is again, just as, I mean, I really do think of it as like hard coded into our biology. It's a part of being human. So I think we've been denying a part of the human experience, and that is irrational.
Another focus for IFGT is we're using the phrase the tipping point, which obviously we didn't coin, and it has referred to many different phenomena and events in human history. But this one, we're referring to the idea that, like you and I, and probably most of the people watching this, have had some shift, some awakening, transformation, whatever label you want to use,
Mhm.
and that there is, maybe a lot of people seem to believe that this is increasing in terms of numbers and maybe
Yeah.
pace in the world, and but that at some point this tipping point would be where a critical mass have awakened, so that these things that you write about, that we currently kind of struggle to get our minds around before we've gotten to the point where we've adapted and gotten used to it. But at some point, this will just be kind of what is known to humanity, to everyone, and use the example of, at one point in human history, it was simply fact, so we thought, that the Earth was the center of the solar system, until something caused that shift. And at some point, there were enough people that changed their viewpoint and accepted the fact that it was actually the sun in the center, that now we don't have conversations about that. Yeah, I think you'd struggle to find a place where people are still debating and just awed by the fact that, oh, it's really the sun. But at one point in human history, that probably was it. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
But so there is this tipping point. So I think your work does advance that. And part of what IFGT is exploring is, what can we do as both an organization and as individuals to help facilitate that? And so I wanted to explore that. In your opinion, what are the implications for individuals and for society more broadly, of embracing a more meaningful cosmos? And how can we accomplish that practically?
Yeah, well, I think the implications are better than where we are now. So, I mean, there's something in academia, at least. I don't know if maybe it's in popular culture too, the meaning crisis. So they talk about it a lot in academia, but that, yeah, there's just because of the last couple hundred years, of us stripping the world of meaning through rationalism and the scientific materialist worldview, that people have no they have no comfort, I would say, for a lot of the things so that they encounter. And actually in science, we it's like a common a way to dismiss religion and spirituality is to say, oh, it's just an evolutionary biology thing. We've evolved to use these, as comforting mechanisms for ourselves. Like we can't deal with, so we've created these fantastic stories to comfort ourselves, which is so crazy now that I've expanded my thinking. Because I remember you just accept that. You just are like, yep, you accept that, and then you repeat it to people. But if you stop to think about it, like, I mean, the fact that humans would be able to make up all of this stuff in itself is exceptional and fantastic. And I always found it odd that behaviorism in science, like we compare humans to animals more than we recognize our differences with animals, right? Like a lot of neuroscience and psychology is like how similar we are to rats and monkeys. And it's like, but hello, we're humans and we have art and culture and music and we're so different. But yeah, so I think we're actually, we know biologically we're built for connection. So one thing is we've lost connection to each other. And I think that is partly driving the meaning crisis, but I think also loss of spirituality, loss of the idea of there being any actual external extrinsic meaning in the world. I think all those things have contributed to, a crisis of people kind of just being like, well, what's the point of this? What does it matter what I do? What does it matter why I'm here? My suffering has no meaning. And I think that really is a huge problem. I think that's what is driving the meaning crisis, is people suffer and then there's no meaning behind it. And even in my own journey, that's what it was. It was like, I'm suffering. Why am I suffering was my question. And I went to search for answers, and luckily I found it. But what was killing me was that my worldview was telling me there is no meaning to this. Like, this is just how it is. And that it kills something inside of you. So I think that, and just thinking to myself, like when I started incorporating a simple question in my daily life of like, what could the meaning of this be? Or what lesson am I supposed to learn? Immediately improved everything. So it turns out that spirituality is very valuable. And that was, funny enough, that was my initial kind of, besides focusing on whether this stuff is true or not, my initial thing was just justifying that it's okay to lean on spirituality. That was actually my biggest hang up at first, was to justify why on earth I would say it's okay to be spiritual, because my environment, made it seem like if you did that, you were stupid. So I found the value first, and then, I was like, well, how do I know it's true? And I couldn't accept that, don't worry if it's true or not, just take it. I couldn't do that. I had to know. So, and that's why the book is called Proof, is because I went looking for proof. I wanted to know, what's the proof? I want to see it. What's the mechanism? What is it measured in? So I think simply adding meaning back, which is what I write a lot about now in my, or I try to when I get to that topic, but accepting, not hammering it out. We've been trained to hammer the meaning out of things, not only to not search for meaning, but to actively hammer it out of everything. So even meaningful coincidences, right? Like something that could give you goosebumps and make your, like a heartwarming thing, like you feel like someone close to you that's passed away has given you a message or a sign, immediately it's like the negative Nancy over your shoulder being like, don't be silly. That's just a coincidence. That doesn't mean anything. And so simply not hammering out meaning, and then maybe searching for meaning in those moments would start to help. But I think that it would help us connect to each other too, right? Because one thing about those experiences too is that they're nice. I mean, they're nice for you, but they're nice to share with others. Like there's something so exhilarating about sharing those kinds of stories with another person. Like you get excited off of each other's excitement. Like, so I think it would make us all closer to each other. And I think that, it would alleviate a lot of the angst around meaningless suffering.
What can we do practically? Because that's the idea is that the tipping point may just evolve, and some of the wisdom, frankly, talks about there is a divine plan, and so it will occur. It's just how and how long and how much suffering and how much effort is going to be required. And so when you talk about things like allowing for making space for things in life to be meaningful again, I think it also, when you were talking, it made me realize that another thing that you've done, and just maybe if you can talk about this further, is at one point in your life, the thought of approaching your colleagues at work at USC or in an academic conference, I suppose, or any other similar forum, there was an intimidation factor to not want to talk about some of these things, and you discuss those in your book. But I guess I have two questions. One is, now that you have the opportunity to look back, were your fears as justified as they seem to be, and as inhibiting as they were for some point in your life? And what would be your suggestions on how we can do something else that you had in your previous answer, which was communicating, talking about these things? How can we do this so that it doesn't take such an act of bravery and trailblazing like you've done, so that we can become more comfortable and make this kind of just matter of fact, and it's okay to talk about these things?
Yeah. So my colleagues, so I think that I ended up being pleasantly surprised actually with them, that many of them were had experiences themselves, or they knew people in their lives who had experiences. A lot of them were really curious about philosophy and ultimate reality, and all of them admitted that science has a lot of limitations, and that if something happens even one time, like it's an outlying data point, then it matters, then it happened once, and that it could happen again, even if it's unlikely to happen, that it needs to be incorporated into the model. So, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised. But they were private conversations. There was only one colleague who I almost regret talking to. But I mean, not anymore. But there was only one colleague who I was like, we are not on the same page. And but I also took him as a lesson. And like, I later spoke with other colleagues about it, and they're like, oh my God, like, why did you even bother talking to him? He's so cynical and skeptical about like literally his whole life and everything. So then you start to realize, but once I realized in myself that it was my own ego, then you could just easily see in others, it's their ego, and it's whatever their issues are, right? And it's like, I don't even care to sit and think about what the issues are. There are just issues there that are not mine. So, I mean, I was mostly pleasantly surprised, and then since then, I've had, I think we talked about, a collaborator and I have organized a neuroscience and spirituality events, or science and spirituality events. So at one of our neuroscience conferences, we did this, and we thought no one would show up, and then 50 neuroscientists showed up, and we were blown away. And they were so interested in talking about all of the precognition, reincarnation, psychedelics, God. So I thought, if at one conference there were 50 scientists, there's so many more. So we started a group for them, as you mentioned in my bio. That group wanted to stay in touch. We started a Google group. We send out a newsletter once a month highlighting like podcasts and articles and books, because there's so much that they don't have time to look into that stuff. So we send out a newsletter. But since then, we've also found another group, a bigger group of physicians and scholars and scientists who have had or are interested in emergent phenomena is what they call it, which is basically a spiritual, mystical peak experience, so, or energetic or kundalini or whatever you want to call it. So they're human I think is what people forget.
Right.
And that just because they're scientists and we like to pretend sometimes like that we're not human, they are human. Of course they've experienced it. It's as I right now, it's a common and a typical human experience that we ignore. And that's why this is a problem, because you're ignoring such a huge part of people's lives to justify a worldview that really just doesn't work. And so again, you're telling people that their experiences are not important. They learn to not trust themselves. They disconnect from themselves and their experiences when you tell them that. And so that is also why it's so important to share stories. I mean, how to do that is, you know, I don't know, it does take a little bit of a leap of faith and a little bit of bravery. Like I didn't want to do that social at the conference. I felt threatened going back in there, and I was terrified to do it. And but I was so glad that we did, because if we hadn't, we never would have met those 50 people who were interested in this. So
Well, and I want to mention just that it wasn't just a conference, it was the conference. It was the
yeah.
Society for Neuroscience
Mm.
annual international conference. That's, I think, the biggest
Yeah.
of neuroscientists in the world annually.
30,000 a year, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, it's a trade-off between a moment of being scared, but then feeling, I think, profound connection with another human. So I mean, I think a lot of life is like that. Yeah, but there are also communities, I'm sure that, you know, you could, like this one, that you could find
Right.
like-minded people where it's easier to start connecting with people. And the more you tell a story, the easier it gets. So
Another great point. Thanks for making that. Yes. Yeah. And to show that a lot of this, I think, is learning that we accepted ourselves, and then once you get to a point where those sources of resistance and fear give way, to just say, no, this is what I now know. It's not
yes,
necessarily belief anymore. At some point it becomes a knowing. It's in
that's right.
yourself. And at that point you talk about it, and the fears have dissipated, because you figure this is important to share. So
Yeah, you're so right. Actually, I love that you said that, because it's true. At first, there is that fear because it is a belief, and you feel like you have to justify your belief. I mean, depending on your psychological disposition, but I definitely felt that way. And I think after a while, you know, and so now, you know, when I interact with people, if they don't believe it, I'm not offended, I'm not angry, you know, and it's just kind of like, and I don't question my belief anymore, because it's not a belief, it's a knowing. Yeah.
yeah, the that download I got of transcending disbelief, and then later in the evening I realized, well, that's also, you have to transcend belief, because disbelief is a belief. And you get past that, and part of that transcendence, I think, is when you do embody it, it becomes a knowing that's part of the learning. So we're a little bit past an hour, and I appreciate your generosity with your time, and those with us during this recording live, for staying with us. I haven't seen other hands raised or chat. I wanted to just kind of maybe round this out, unless there's more about, there's tons more, but just in terms of what we can do, I think just to reiterate the themes of communicating, maybe taking that leap of faith, trusting that this is important to do, and to see it as a service, I think, is in a way, like you did with helping to organize the meeting at the Society for Neuroscience annual meeting. That was, when you told me that a few days ago, I was blown away that, yeah, if you want to pick a forum to burst
Me
out on
too.
the big stage, that's part of why I was so enamored with your bravery, because that took a lot of guts, and thank you for doing it. So I wanted to see if we could explore a couple other things, because one of the things you're doing now, yes, and Dina is just put something in the chat, which is exactly the next place I was going. So something that you talked to me a little bit about when we met a week or so ago and was in your bio is that some of your work now has gotten into psychedelics and the research involving psychedelics, as well as your own experiences and whatnot. So just want to kind of share with us kind of your thoughts on that and what you're doing.
Yeah. So I was not ever interested in psychedelics. I didn't even know what they were really. But when I was doing research for myself, for the spiritual research before I wrote the book, somebody I spoke to told me, they're like, hey, have you looked into psychedelics yet? And I was like, why would I look into psychedelics? And they're like, there's a lot of weird paranormal stuff that happens in psychedelics. So that piqued my interest. And I went to the literature because that's what I do. And I found literature from the 50s to 70s, but then also the present day research, like the Renaissance is in full, it's on its way. So there's been a lot of recent research, and yeah, the guy was right. And so there's a lot of and it's well documented in the 50s and 70s, before these substances were made illegal. Psychiatrists used them in therapy sessions, and they caused huge breakthroughs for people where nothing else had worked. So for alcoholics, for people who are addicted to drugs, people just who had serious personality issues or just deep trauma, they had breakthroughs. So they wrote manuals. I mean, they did this for 20 plus years, but they also noticed that there were a lot of telepathy, or a lot of telepathic communication, and a lot of feeling each other's emotions, and then people would have visions that would come true. So when I looked into the history, it turns out that a lot of indigenous cultures, actually a lot of cultures around the world, but in current day, a lot of indigenous cultures use these substances in shamanic rituals and traditions to literally talk to the spirit world, and to like prepare for a fight with their enemies, or to find out why someone is sick and to get the answer to heal them. And so it's known that these substances can put you in touch with something greater than us. And then they were made illegal. So then the recent research has been looking less, it was not really focused on that kind of stuff. It's more focused on addressing trauma. So MAPS is the organization that's been driving the majority of this research for 30 years. Rick Toblin's been like spearheading it by himself. But MDMA, which is actually not classically a psychedelic, but it's one of these substances we put in the category, is being used to treat PTSD, and psilocybin mushrooms are being used to treat depression. And those are the two most likely to be approved by the FDA. And the MDMA probably next year, psilocybin soon. And the reason these work is because, and they're so right, we can talk about two things. I mean, one, the basic neuroscience or psychology, we're not really sure, of course, how they work, but the general model is that they loosen up your brain, your actual networks in your brain, and as a result, your psychological constructs in your brain. So you become more open, literally, to new perspectives, to new ways of thinking, to new behaviors. And so you like suddenly can have insights into yourself and your own behavior. And then it's easier to also deal with emotions that come up and just release them instead of suppressing them. And it turns out, which many people who work in behavioral health have known for a long time, that suppressed emotions are really what cause a lot of mental illness. So, and psychiatry doesn't address that in the current day. They just give you pharmaceuticals to cover up the symptoms. So psychedelics, the reason everyone's so excited is because they're just another, which there are other modalities besides psychedelics that help you do that, to get in touch with your subconscious and release whatever is there that needs to go, that's holding you back. But psychedelics just are the ones that are, it's like a substance you can take, and Americans love that. So that's the recent research. And then the other interesting thing is that they put you in this altered states of consciousness is what it's called. So any kind of altered state, and again, doesn't have to come from psychedelics. It could be breath work, it could be meditation, could be sound baths, chanting, like anything like that. Altered states are what put you in touch with, like you were saying, you were meditating and you got a download. It puts you in touch with, we don't know what, but as I talk about in the book, one possibility is a field of some sort that has information, or, there's a lot of different models. We don't really know, but it's, they're really useful for that. And I've just found them very useful for myself in understanding not only myself, but understanding our reality and like our experience of our reality. And I often say it's like stepping into 3D and then stepping back into 2D, and you never knew 3D could exist. So I like them. They're not for everyone. I definitely don't recommend.
You reminded me, you and I had talked offline about Dr. Irvin Laszlo's work, and in a book I interviewed him about was a book he titled The Akashic Field, which includes the Akashic records for those familiar with that, but it's this universal field was a term for it that you were talking about a moment ago. And there's a chapter in that book by, I think the person's name is Chris Bach, if I'm not mistaken, and he has been doing LSD research personally for many years and carefully documenting. You familiar with that work?
Yes. Yeah. I have his book. I haven't read it, but I know of it. Yeah. He's taken over 200 LSD sessions himself. Yeah.
And but they're related, and he has, it's not like he's just drugged down. Those of us who remember the 60s and 70s and the reputation that drugs like LSD got, which was more of the trippy experience, and plus all the bad propaganda about how dangerous it was. I remember a booklet I got in my doctor's office as a kid, and someone took LSD and was going to put an electric drill bit through their head or something. And I mean, it's like you hear the horror stories, but really there was so much more to it. I will also say that someone that I'm studying with has talked about that they're not for everybody, and there are aspects of this that as you progress on the spiritual path, you may be beyond benefiting from taking these types of drugs, which include things like ayahuasca as well, and DMT is now being experimented with. And so I think this isn't a blanket advocating statement for everybody should go run out and do psychedelics. They're an avenue, and as you said, Mona, it's a way that may be and definitely has been right for some people to get that crack and let the light in. But it doesn't necessarily, we're not at all saying, and I want to be very clear about this from IFGT's perspective, we're not advocating everybody go run out and start dabbling with psychedelics. If you are interested, there's tons of material that's out there. There are places like the work that you were talking about. Johns Hopkins is doing a lot of the studies, and they're very controlled. And I would certainly say that if you do want to do these, last thing you should do is go, find something on the street and take it by yourself. But go. There are lots of shamans, lots of people that are doing these very organized. So I would suggest that you do that and set the intention that you want to, get in touch with your higher self, and that I think that also would change things.
I would also just say, because they allow the opening up to your unconscious or to things that are suppressed, you definitely want to do it with a guide who's trained in dealing with that, because if not, then you just have things coming up that you don't know how to deal with possibly, and then you're just re-traumatized instead of healing. You've been re-traumatized. So right.
So we'll take one more question, and Gary, go ahead, please.
I have a couple of things. One, I assume you're familiar with the work of Dr. Stanislav Grof.
Yes.
He has, I see the smile there. He has both MD and PhD degrees. He's originally from Prague, in what's now the Czech Republic, and he did work at Johns Hopkins, and himself became interested in the psychedelic experience through his own experience, which is pretty mind-blowing. He saw himself, up in the cosmos, and it was really pretty trippy. But he suffered a stroke a few years ago. I don't know that he's too involved these days, but his legacy sort of goes on with what he calls holotropic breath work. He also doesn't like the term altered states of consciousness. He prefers non-ordinary, but maybe it's a subtle distinction. But so so one question is, what do you think about what I think is essentially hyperventilation? They call it holotropic breath work. So as an alternative to psychedelics, although I think that the laws are being relaxed a bit so that there is some dabbling with the psychedelics these days. And the other question is, do you see yourself, and maybe once I get a chance to read your book, this question will be answered, but I'm just kind of curious, do you see yourself now as sort of being given any sort of mission by whatever is enlightening you?
Yeah.
And if so, can you say maybe a few words about what you see it as being? And
yeah,
I guess
well,
that's it.
yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
glad. Thank you so much for that comment. Actually, I was going to say, and then I didn't. So I guess I should have, because you brought it. I was going to say that instead of psychedelics, people should probably first try holotropic breath work, because, or other variations of it, like there's one called neurotropic breath work, I think, or some neurodynamic or something like that, because it can get you into a very similar state. But since you're doing the breathing, you can stop it at any moment. So it's a much safer way. And I've done it, and it's probably as powerful. It's very powerful. Yeah, it's so it's a good thing to try first instead of psychedelics. Stan Grof's great. I actually saw him at the MAPS conference, and he's making the rounds. So and your second question, well, it's weird. I don't like the word mission, but I know what you mean. And I mean, the funny thing is, actually one of the first, well, so the short answer is I try to just follow my bliss and not worry about it too much, because I've just found that works for me pretty well. But I found it rewarding, and I'm just glad that I could speak to a lot of scientists have reached out to me since the book came out. So I'm just glad I can talk to them, because a lot of them say, like, I don't have anyone to talk. I've never told anyone this. I don't have anyone to talk about this with. And so I feel like, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And so, I do really think there's no such thing as science and spirituality. I think it's all one thing.
Yeah.
So just trying to find a way to break those barriers and those perception boxes, like the way that people think about these things is really just the only limitation. So I do want to help do that. But the funny story I was going to say is, one of my first psychic readings that I went to before I think I had read Brian Weiss's book, and that maybe one other book by a psychic. And I went for this reading right before COVID-19, the shutdown. And the guy, I think I went to ask, like, I had just learned about soul purpose. And I asked the guy, he could do Akashic Records reading. And I said, what's my soul purpose? And he immediately said, oh, you want to bridge science and spirituality. And I didn't at the time. And I was like, no, I was like, no, you didn't hear me. I just am getting into this. And he was like, no, you didn't hear me. He's like, you've done this many times before. And then he started like, well, explaining it. And then I just left, and I was like, whatever. And I didn't even think about it. But then, and then all of this happened. And of course, the skeptic would say, because they're always in my head, maybe he planted the seed. But truly, I am the kind of person who can't work on things if I'm not interested in it. Like, I'm really driven by passion. So I really do follow my bliss.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Mona. And Dina had one more question. So we'll read this. So she asked if you have any caution regarding psychics, and she likened that some of the she suspects that some of the hesitancy expressed about formalized religion is about loss of autonomy, giving away power to this or that religion. So does that also happen with psychics?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I never recommend people get readings. I've enjoyed them, but there's no certification, there's no ratings for them. It's hard to find ones that are good. And then on top of that, I have a unscientific theory that just like you have to find a perfect fit with a therapist, that you have to find a frequency fit with a psychic. So I think there's just a lot of factors. So if you I like getting them and I get them, but I now don't think that that's my future. Like instead of asking what's going to happen, I'll ask, what do I need to know? What am I missing? What should I be developing now? What's blocking me? Things like that. They're very good at that. So it's more like intuitive, and it's more about development. And sometimes I do ask what's coming up, but only so that I can change it if I want. So
Yeah, if you want, right? And I guess that's part of Dina's question, is that if you give too much of your power away and say, oh, well, my psychic said this is going to happen, so oh my God, I better change this X,
Yeah.
Y, and Z about my life. So
And
yeah.
I can tell you that a lot of what they say doesn't happen, and that's what I mean about the fit. I mean, even the best never get everything right. So
You do cite in your book something else that I was interested to see, that you, of course, come across it because you research just about everything. But the Windbridge Institute that has created a very rigorous certification program for mediums. And you pointed out, as did this was also one of the founders, was Rick Archer interviewed her as well. And the quadruple blind experimental design, which is a point you made several times in your book, that the rigor of a lot of the research literature and experimental designs in that you reviewed was at least as substantial as that which is published in neuroscience peer-reviewed journals. And so the fact that, you know, that I think helps to extinguish a lot of the doubt and the chance that would maybe naively be scoffed at in some of this work. But I don't know if you've seen, I think in your book, I don't know if you said this, but is there another study that you're aware of that has 5 blind characteristics in the design?
And I mean, no, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, double is kind of the standard, right? If you do a double blind,
Yeah.
you know, you're kind of covering so
yeah, they do a good job. And I would say even with like the Institute for Noetic Sciences does a lot of research like that too, working with exploratory research, working with intuitives and stuff. And having had the chance to read those, I do think there's just a lot of factors that we don't understand that influence these phenomena. So I'm actually hopeful. I mean, that's one other maybe reason for talking about this more and helping people bridge science and spirituality is imagine